We're doing a series on listening to God. We've done recognizing the voice of God, we've done listening to God through personal prayer, and we've done listening to God through pictures, images, and visions, and prophetic words. This week, we're looking at listening to God through listening to others. If you've missed any of the previous sermons, do have a look on the website and you can catch up. I often find that I am the most challenged person when I speak. This series has been no exception for me. There's been things that I thought I knew that I've been reminded of, and things that I've remembered, but then I thought I need to put into practice more. I hope it's been the same for you. But perhaps you're thinking, well, this is all very interesting, but is it really sermon material, listening to others? I would strongly contend that it is. If we look at how much listening Jesus did, if we look at how he asked people questions rather than talking at them, if we look at how he listened to his disciples as a way of training and teaching them, listening was a distinctive mark, not only of the ministry, but of the personality of Jesus. So if we want to be like Jesus, we need to be good at listening to other people. And the first point is that listening is a ministry. Anne Long wrote a seminal book on listening. She led a project called Christian Listeners. That was with the Acorn Healing Trust, whom you might have heard of. In Anne's book, she says this: listening is a ministry in the Spirit of Christ, who stooped to wash feet. Listening is a foot-washing ministry. In the first place, to do with attitudes rather than skills. Attitudes of availability, compassion, and belief in people. We know from our own experience, she goes on to say, what being heard can do for us. And draws out three aspects of listening as a ministry. Firstly, listening is a gift. It is a gift that we give to others, or we can give to others. Secondly, listening is hospitality. Henry Nouwen calls it the greatest form of hospitality that does not seek to change people, but to offer them space where change can take place. It is, he goes on, not a subtle invitation to adopt the lifestyle of the host, but it is the gift of a chance for the guest to find his own lifestyle. Thirdly, listening is healing. Anne Long talks of her own experience of being listened to by a Christian couple who were leaders at the church. She describes it like this: as they offered compassion and discernment in a friendly space, so I was able to start opening up the pain of years. In that friendly space, I began not only to trust the two people who were there for me, but also the Christ whom they incarnated. And church began to make sense, after all. Could this be the silver bullet? Could this be the way that we can draw people back to Jesus Christ? Draw people back to the church who have left the church disillusioned, disappointed, or even hurt. Listening. Listening is a ministry. We had an excellent pastoral care training day last year with CWR, and they had a big section on listening. Worth getting hold of those notes or reading them again if you came along. Ask Magnus if you'd like a copy of the notes. So that's the first point. I could go on, but I want to say quite strongly that listening is a ministry which personifies Jesus in ministering to others. Second point. Some people do seem to be better at listening than others. That's true. But the Bible teaches us that listening is not optional for Christians. It's mandatory for all Christians to listen. and to try to listen well. So we can't just say listening is someone else's gifting. In the book of James, chapter 1, verse 19, it says, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires." Everyone should be quick to listen. That means everyone. Everyone in the community of God. Good listening is also good conventional wisdom. Listening is essential to any relationship. In the marriage relationship, this is particularly highlighted by any good marriage course or book. In his book, The 60-Minute Marriage, Rob Parsons tells a beautiful story of a couple who managed to hold their marriage together, get the marriage back together by adopting good listening practices. And Nikki and Sila Lee, in their book on marriage, call it the second golden rule of marriage is to keep talking and keep listening to each other. We will all know, whether we're married or not, that good friendships depend so much on listening, and it's so valuable to be listened to and to be able to listen to a friend. So that's the second point. Listening, good listening, is for all. Everybody needs to try and be a good listener. That has significant spiritual and emotional impact. And then this is a skill that we can practice and get better at. When our children were younger, we used to go on long car journeys. We would play this game where you have to try and remember what you went to the shops for, and then you take it in turns to build up a list. So the first person says, I went to the shops and I bought an apple. The second person would then have to remember the first thing and then add their own. So they would say, I went to the shops and I bought an apple and an orange, adding the orange. Then the third person would have to remember the earlier things and add their own. So I went to the shops, I bought an apple, an orange and a pair of jeans. And so it would go on until somebody forgot, and then they wouldn't be able to add their own thing on and they'd be out. What a great lesson for life, that you can't add your own thing until you can remember what everybody else's things are. But there we go. So as a challenge for all of the groups meeting this week and over the next couple of weeks, maybe, or over the summer, play that game. See who wins, how many items they manage to remember as we practice our listening. And let me know, we'll see which group wins and who wins. So it's worth practicing good listeners. That's because if we are good listeners, we will have a good church. We've already seen in our passage that James links communication with conflict management. Quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry. And in our Old Testament passage today, we saw this illustrated. The tribes on the west of the Jordan don't ask the Transjordanian tribes what's going on with this new altar that they've built. They simply put their armour on and get ready to go to war. They assume the worst. And to be fair, the Transjordanian tribes haven't really covered themselves in glory either, because they weren't supposed to build another altar. It says that clearly in Leviticus 17, that everyone should come together to one place to offer their sacrifices and offerings together. So why would they be building another altar? And the people of Israel know very well that they are bound together and in covenant together, and the activities of one tribe will affect all. The activities of one member with the sin of Achan that's described will affect the whole community. They are bound in covenant together and with God. So they send the priest. You would imagine that would be a peace-seeking gesture. Not necessarily in this case. Phinehas the priest was known for his zeal in using a spear. So a bit like sending Conor McGregor or Mike Tyson to sort out a broken fence dispute with a neighbour, perhaps. Not maybe the most peaceful of gestures. But once communication is established, then rapidly this situation can gradually de-escalate from each step to the next step down. Communication is established, understanding is established, and the misinterpretation is taken away, and the fear can be removed. We learn here that lack of communication leads to fear. In verse 24 we saw that they did it for fear. Lack of communication leads to mistrust. They feared discrimination, that they would be discriminated because they were over the other side of Jordan. They feared that they and their children would be excluded, that their families and descendants would be spurned and despised away from the blessing of God. That's where that mistrust had grown. And then we saw rash actions where they didn't consider how those could be interpreted. And we saw hurried actions, misinterpretation followed by the other party, then threats, violent threats, and imminent conflict. But then this is de-escalated by establishing communication. And once it's established, those steps can be taken back one by one. It's a bit like the red phone on the desk. In 1963, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, they realised, America and Russia, that is, the superpowers of the time, how dangerously close they were to World War III, to Armageddon. And they realised that it was because of the delay of communication. By the time a message had been sent, received, decrypted, interpreted, analysed, then events could have escalated, or other things could have happened, and there was opportunity for misinterpretation. And so they decided that they would put a telephone on the desk of each of the presidents of those nations, those superpowers, so that communication could be clear, could be quick, could be secure, and there could be an opportunity to avoid misinterpretation if ever the need should arise. That's the value of communication. That's the value of listening and understanding. And if someone does something that we don't necessarily agree with, that's where we should start, in establishing communication and understanding, motivation, listening to explanation that we're given. So listening is for everyone. Listening is a ministry which personifies Jesus Christ in ministering to others. Listening is mandatory. And if we're better listeners, we will be a better church. You know, we're going to feel passionately about faith, and that's only right, because faith matters. We're not always going to agree, but we need to disagree well if we don't agree. We need to understand the perspective of others, recognise what is good about their perspective, recognise also what we have in common, even if we don't fully agree. And we should remain true to what we believe. And also, we should aim to collaborate on the things that we agree on. If our aim and their aim is that Christ is the head, then surely we can work out a way together, a way forwards in love. And as we gather around the Word of God, we will find enough things that we agree on to be able to celebrate together, to collaborate together, to create opportunities for the gospel and to see God's kingdom grow. The greatest way is love, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 13, as I said in the last sermon. And philosopher and theologian Paul Tillich said, the first duty of love is to listen. So we start in our duty to love God by listening to God. And we start in our duty to love one another by listening to one another. Amen. Next, we're going to be coming to communion to remember Jesus and his sacrifice on the cross for us. But let's also remember that this is a time when we gather together In unity, we drink, when we were together, we drank the cup together at the same time as a symbol of our unity. We're not able to do that this morning, but this is a symbol of our covenant together. So we remember that as we take the cup of wine this morning. We remember our unity together. Jesus tells us to love one another as I have loved you. And I've seen this beautiful love lived out in this community in Penrath. And it's very moving and a privilege to be part of it, to join this community. It's something that we treasure. So we remember our commitment to love one another. So before we come to communion, we're going to spend a few minutes in prayer, asking God to help us to listen to him, to love him. Asking God to help us to listen to one another, to love one another. Please continue with communion when you're ready.